I have lived long enough to know that the wealthiest things in life are not always measured in money. They are not stored in bank vaults or hidden in the safes of glass towers. Sometimes they are found in the simplest places, in a kind word, in a hand that chooses to lift rather than push away, in eyes that see you for who you are, not what you have. But to discover this truth, I had to leave behind everything I had built. The estates in Banana Island, the high-rise apartments that kissed the clouds in Victoria Island, the fleet of blacked-out SUVs that moved like shadows through the choking traffic of Third Mainland Bridge, the crisp Italian suits hanging in rows inside air-conditioned wardrobes, the French colognes, the polished mahogany furniture, the glass tables on which contracts worth billions were signed. I had to strip myself of it all, and wear the face of a man no one would care to see. My name, well, it is not important yet. What matters is that I am a father with one son, my only heir. From the moment he could walk, I promised myself I would give him a life where he would never know hunger, never taste fear, never bow his head in shame. And I kept that promise. I raised him in a world of abundance. His childhood was spent in houses that looked like they had been carved out of dreams. His toys were imported, his clothes hand-stitched. When he was 16, I bought him his first car, a brand-new Mercedes, not because he needed it, but because I could. But somewhere along the way, I realized I had given him too much of everything except the one thing that mattered: humility. He was kind in his own way, yes, but I could see it in the way he moved through life, as if the world owed him something, as if loyalty could be bought, as if love was a thing you could wrap in gold and present with a ribbon. And when it came to women, he was lost. They came in swarms, drawn to his name, to the weight of our family, to the wealth that seemed to drip from his very skin. He believed them. He believed they loved him for him. But I could see the truth in their eyes. I knew they were in love with the shine, not the soul. I could not let my son marry such a woman. I could not hand over my legacy to someone who would strip it bare the moment my heart stopped beating. So I made a decision. It began with a journey, one I had never taken before. I drove through the streets of Lagos, past the luxury districts where my name carried weight, into neighborhoods where no one would know me, where the roads were cracked and the air carried the smell of roasted corn, fried plantain, and the oil-soaked smoke from suya grills, where yellow Danfo buses rattled like they had been stitched together from scrap, and hawkers moved through traffic with baskets balanced on their heads. And there, in a market street thick with people, I disappeared. I gave my driver the keys to my car. I sent him away, and I walked into a tailor's shop where no one knew me. I bought faded, oversized clothes, the kind that hung loosely on the shoulders of men who spent their days in the sun. I tore them in places, rubbed them against the earth until they looked like they had lived 1,000 lives. I wore an old cap low over my head, letting its shadow cover my face. Then I did something I never thought I would. I bound my eyes, a strip of worn black cloth, tied tight. I wanted the world to think I could not see. That was how I became the poor blind beggar. I found a spot on a street corner, just outside a row of busy shops where the noise of Lagos life never stopped. The air there was heavy with dust and car fumes, with the shouts of traders calling out their prices, with the impatient honks of cars trapped in endless traffic. I sat there, a tin plate by my side, a walking stick in my hand, the sound of my own breathing filling the spaces between the chaos. And for the first time in my life, I waited for strangers to notice me. Most didn't. They walked past, their feet quick, their eyes elsewhere. Some glanced at me and looked away, guilt flashing for a moment before vanishing into the haze of their own lives. A few dropped coins, but not because they cared, because it was easier than thinking about what it meant to ignore me. But I wasn't looking for pity. I was watching, listening. I was searching for something rare, the kind of heart that my son would never find in his world of tinted glass and golden gates. Days turned into weeks. The heat of Lagos beat down on me during the day, and at night, the air turned damp and heavy. My skin darkened under the sun. My clothes began to smell of sweat and dust. My body ached from sitting on hard ground, and sometimes my stomach curled in hunger. I met all kinds of people. The proud ones who thought their small kindnesses made them saints. The selfish ones, who brushed past me as if I were a stone in their path. The cruel ones who mocked me, who kicked at my tin plate for sport. But every evening, as I lay in the shadows of the city, I reminded myself why I was there. I wasn't just pretending to be poor. I was searching for the woman who would one day stand beside my son. Not because of who he was, but because of who she was. It was on the 27th day that I first heard her voice. Soft, almost drowned out by the sound of traffic. I felt a shadow fall over me, and then, the weight of something placed gently in my hand. It was bread. Warm. No one had ever given me food since I had been sitting on that corner. Only coins, as if hunger could be solved with metal. She didn't say anything. She didn't wait for me to thank her. She just placed the bread in my hand and walked away. But I remembered her footsteps. The next day she came again. This time it was a bottle of water. And again she left without a word. I began to listen for her. The light, quick steps. The faint scent of soap and fresh air she carried with her. I could tell she was not wealthy. Her shoes made a faint scuffing sound on the pavement, the kind worn thin by long use. Her voice, when I finally heard it in greeting to another, was gentle, but carried the quiet weariness of someone who worked hard every day. She never asked for my story. She never tried to look beneath the blindfold. She just gave, not because she had much, but because she could not walk past someone in need. And in those small moments, I began to think I had found her. What I didn't know then was that this young woman carried her own wounds, that she had been betrayed before, that life had stripped her dreams down to the bone. But fate was bringing her to me. I only had to wait and watch and pray that when the truth was revealed, she would not turn away from the man I truly was, or from the son I was hoping she would one day love. And so I sat there, the blind beggar in the dust, as Lagos roared around me. Every passing day, every heartbeat, every moment she stopped by my side. It was bringing us closer to the truth neither of us could yet see. Lagos has a way of swallowing faces. One moment, you see someone every day. The next, they vanish into the restless tide of the city. People leave, people change, people fade. But she didn't. Every morning, the sound of her footsteps found me. Soft, measured, carrying the rhythm of someone who had walked the same path for years. Some days she brought bread again. Sometimes a small pack of jollof rice wrapped in clear nylon, still warm from the pot. Other times it was fruit, oranges peeled halfway, ready for me to eat. And always she left before I could say much. If I tried to thank her, she would simply nod. Though I could not see it, I could feel the air shift, the way she lingered for just a second before moving on. It was rare. Not the food, not the water, but the way she gave without asking for my story, without needing to feel good about herself. Most people who give to beggars expect something in return. Gratitude, a blessing, maybe even a performance of suffering. But not her. Over time, I learned her routine. She would come in the morning, just after the air had begun to warm under the sun. Her shoes, always the same pair, were worn at the edges, the soles making that familiar whispering sound against the pavement. I could hear the faint rustle of fabric, the shift of a bag on her shoulder. I imagined it was a simple bag. Maybe canvas, maybe old leather, the kind used every day without care for style or brand. From the sound of her voice, the careful way she spoke to traders nearby, I guessed she was not from wealth. She used her words like coins only when necessary. It was on the 11th day of her visits that I first sensed something deeper. She had come earlier than usual, her footsteps quicker, her breathing slightly uneven. When she placed the food in my hand, her fingers trembled. Not with fear, with exhaustion. That was the first time I wondered, who was feeding her? Who was taking care of her the way she took care of me? It is a strange thing to sit in the dust and be seen as the one in need, while knowing that the person giving to you might be carrying a heavier weight than your own. Lagos is a city of masks. I had worn mine for decades. The mask of the billionaire. The man whose smile was printed on magazine covers, whose handshake signed contracts that shifted markets. Now I wore another mask, the blind beggar, invisible except when pitted. But she wore a mask of quiet endurance. the kind you could only recognize if you had once worn it yourself. Weeks passed, and I began to hear pieces of her life, not from her, but from the market itself. Markets are like living creatures, they talk. They carry gossip in the air like dust, settling it on anyone who listens. I heard a trader say she worked as a cleaner in one of the big office buildings across the bridge, that she cared for a sick mother at home, that she had no father, and that life had been unkind to her, so unkind that most people would have hardened themselves against the world. But she hadn't. One day, rain came to Lagos. It was sudden, heavy, the kind that turns streets into rivers in minutes. People scattered under umbrellas, ducked into shops, pressed against walls. And there I was, the blind beggar with nowhere to go. I felt the first drops on my face, then the downpour soaking into my clothes, running down my back, cold and unrelenting. Cars hissed past, their tires slicing through water. Voices rose in complaint, laughter, curses. And then her hands, warm, urgent, pulling me gently towards shelter. She didn't care that she was getting wet. She didn't care that people were watching. She found a dry spot under a narrow roof and left her bag in my lap. When she returned, she was holding a small nylon raincoat, cheap and thin, but enough to shield me from the worst of it. She had bought it. For me. I cannot describe the feeling that rose in my chest that day. Not gratitude, something heavier. A recognition. This was the kind of woman I had been searching for. The kind who gave even when the world had given her so little. That night, I sat in the shadows long after the market had closed. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the orange glow of streetlights. I thought of my son, his arrogance, his careless way of moving through life, the women who circled him like moths to a flame. Would he see her worth? Or would he dismiss her because she did not shine like the women he knew? I decided then I would bring them together, not as a billionaire, not as a father arranging a marriage, but as a man who had seen her heart and wanted my son to see it too. Still, I knew the danger. If she learned who I truly was too soon, the purity of her actions might be questioned. And if my son learned of her through me, he might see her as a test, not a person. I had to be careful. I had to let fate do its work. A week later, fate gave me the opening. I overheard two young men at the market talking about a part-time job in a private estate, cleaning and organizing a garden for one of the wealthiest families in Lagos. The pay was small but steady. I knew the family. I owned the house, and I arranged for her name to be on the list. She didn't know, of course. To her, it would be just another job. To me, it was the first step in weaving her life into my son's without her knowing the threads were placed by my hand. The morning she left the market for that first day of work, I felt an odd emptiness in the space she usually filled. Her absence was a reminder. I was still just the blind beggar in her eyes. But soon she would walk into my real world. The question was, would she walk back out? The morning she walked into my estate, the city felt different. I was not there as the beggar that day. I was there as myself, the billionaire. I had risen early, the way I often do when something important is about to happen. From the balcony of my master bedroom, I watched the mist lift slowly from the garden. The fountain in the center of the driveway sent its soft spray into the air, catching the early light like scattered diamonds. The grass was trimmed to perfection, the flowers lined like a painting, and the black iron gates stood tall against the outside world. Inside those gates, my life was a fortress. Outside, chaos, noise, Lagos, and she was about to cross that line. I did not meet her that morning. That would have been too soon. Instead, I stayed inside, letting the staff handle her arrival. From the window, I caught a glimpse of her, the same woman who had brought me bread and water, now dressed in a simple blouse and long skirt. Her shoes, the same worn pair, tapped softly against the tiled driveway as she followed one of the gardeners toward the back. She didn't belong here, not because she was unworthy, but because this place had been built to keep people like her out. But that was exactly why I wanted her here. My son, meanwhile, had no idea of my plan. He lived in the guest wing, a sleek, glass-walled section of the estate that faced the pool. His mornings were usually slow, coffee on the balcony, phone in hand, calls with friends whose lives were as easy as his. Women came and went like shadows, each one leaving behind the faint scent of perfume and the echo of laughter that meant nothing. He had never looked twice at the staff. To him, they were part of the background. The garden trimmed itself, the meals cooked themselves, the floors polished themselves. I wondered, would he see her? Would he notice the quiet dignity in the way she moved? Or would she vanish into his blind spot, just another face in the blur of his privileged life? For the first week, nothing happened. She worked quietly in the garden, cleaning the flower beds, trimming the hedges, sweeping fallen leaves into neat piles. Sometimes, she carried water to the plants in old plastic buckets, even though we had hoses everywhere. When she finished, she would walk out through the servants' gate and disappear into the street, back to her life outside these walls. I watched from a distance, never approaching. In the evenings, I returned to my other self, the blind beggar at the market. And she still came. She still brought me food, even after spending the day in a house that belonged to me. She still didn't know. It was on the 9th day that I saw the first spark. My son had been on a call by the pool, pacing back and forth, sunglasses shielding his eyes from the afternoon sun. She was near the far hedge, trimming a row of hibiscus flowers. She didn't look at him, but as he ended his call and turned to leave, I saw his gaze shift. Just slightly, just enough to notice her presence. He didn't speak, but he paused. It was the smallest thing, but I knew my son. Something about her had caught his attention. That evening, I sat on the marble bench in the garden, pretending to be admiring the flowers, though my mind was elsewhere. The light was fading, the air cooling into that sweet, brief moment before Lagos night fully arrived. I thought of the dangerous balance I was holding. If my son became interested in her too quickly, suspicion might follow. If he ignored her entirely, my plan would fail. And if she learned who I was before he truly saw her, everything would unravel. I needed patience. Patience had made me wealthy. But here, patience felt like holding my breath underwater. It was in the second week that the moment I had been waiting for arrived. One afternoon, a storm rolled in, sudden, fierce, the kind that Lagos skies unleash without warning. The gardeners scattered for cover. But she stayed. The wind was tearing branches from the trees, rain slashing sideways, and she was still gathering tools, trying to protect the flowers from the weight of the water. My son saw her from his balcony. I saw him watching, and then, without a word, he ran out into the rain. Not to help, at least not at first. He stood there, calling something to her. She looked up, startled, and shook her head. But he crossed the garden anyway, took the tools from her hands, and led her toward the shelter of the veranda. From inside, I watched the way she hesitated before following him. The way she kept her head down, refusing to meet his eyes for more than a second. It was the same humility I had seen at the market, the same quiet strength. And for the first time in a long time, I saw my son smile in a way that was not for show. That night, I returned to the market. I tied the blindfold. I sat in my usual place. When she came, I could hear a faint difference in her voice when she greeted me. She didn't mention the estate. She didn't mention my son. But I could tell something had shifted. And deep inside, I felt the tide turning. But with tides, there is always a danger. The same current that carries you forward can just as easily drag you under. What I didn't know, what I couldn't see from my place in the shadows, was that not everyone in the estate would welcome her presence. And soon whispers would begin. Whispers that could destroy everything before the truth had a chance to breathe. In life, it is not always storms that ruin the harvest. Sometimes, it is the whisper, soft, poisonous, drifting from mouth to ear until it becomes truth in the minds of those who never saw the seed it grew from. The whispers began 2 weeks after the day my son carried her tools out of the rain. At first, they were only among the staff. Then, they reached the ears of his friends, the kind who visited often, their expensive colognes filling the hallways, their laughter echoing across the marble floors. "She's just a cleaner," they said. "She's not one of us." And one afternoon, I overheard the ugliest of them all. She's after his money. I stood in the hallway, unseen, my hands curling into fists at my sides. It was the same cruelty I had feared my whole life for my son, that the people around him would measure worth only in currency and status. And yet here it was, being aimed at the very woman whose worth they could never understand. My son, to his credit, didn't push her away immediately, but I saw the doubt creeping in. The way he hesitated before speaking to her. The way he stopped lingering near the garden. The way he began surrounding himself again with the glittering women who had always been safe distractions. And she noticed. One morning, when she came to the market to bring me food, I could hear it in her voice. A softness, but not the kind I had grown used to. It was the softness of someone who had begun to pull away, to protect herself. I sat there, the blind beggar. And for the first time since beginning this charade, I felt the urgency claw at me. If I waited too long, I would lose her. And if I lost her, I knew my son would spend the rest of his life never knowing what real love looked like. The turning point came on a Saturday morning. I was in my study, reviewing some documents, when the head gardener came to me. He was uneasy, his hands twisting the brim of his hat. "She's leaving, sir," he said. "The young lady. She says today will be her last day." I don't remember setting the papers down. I don't remember crossing the room. I only remember the pounding of my heart as I walked out into the sunlight. She was near the gate, holding a small bag. Not much more than the tools of her work and a folded change of clothes. Her face was calm, but her eyes, they were tired. I could have called her name. I could have told her everything right there. But I didn't. Instead, I did something I had never done before in the weeks of pretending. I removed the blindfold. She stared at me. Her eyes widened in shock. And before she could speak, I stepped forward, holding her gaze. "I am not blind," I said. "I am not poor." I told her everything. How I had sat on that street corner, watching the city pass me by, waiting for a stranger whose kindness came without expectation. How she had been the only one who had given not just coins but care. How I had brought her here into my estate, to see if the same heart that had fed a beggar would remain unchanged when surrounded by wealth. I told her about my son, that he was the reason for all of it, that I had wanted him to see her, to recognize her worth before knowing anything about her place in the world. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She only asked, in the quietest voice, why I hadn't told her sooner. I told her the truth, because I was afraid. Afraid that the moment she knew, her kindness would be painted with suspicion. Afraid that she would feel used. Afraid that she would walk away before the lesson was complete. But the truth was, the lesson was not for her. It was for my son. And so, that same afternoon, I called him into the garden. He arrived in his usual way, confident, well-dressed, a faint trace of expensive cologne lingering in the air. But his expression shifted when he saw her standing there beside me. I told him everything the way I had told her. I told him how she had been the only one to stop for the man in the dust. I told him about the bread, the water, the raincoat in the storm. I told him that her heart was worth more than every coin I had ever made. And then, I said the words I had been holding inside for months. If you are ever to find a wife, let her be someone who would feed you when you have nothing. Someone who would stand beside you in the rain. Someone like her. I will not romanticize what happened next. My son was silent for a long time. Too long. And in that silence I understood. I could give him the example, I could bring the truth into the light, but I could not make his heart see what mine saw. That choice would always be his. In the days that followed, he began to speak to her again. Not as a billionaire son to a servant, but as a man to a woman. And I stepped back, letting time do what my wealth never could. Months later, when they came to me together, it was not with a request for my blessing. It was with gratitude, hers for my trust, his for the lesson. I had once believed I could buy anything. Now I knew better. Humility is not bought. Loyalty is not bought. Love is not bought. They are found, often in the places where no one bothers to look. The richest thing I have ever given my son was not the company, not the estates, not the cars or the accounts. It was the chance to see that the most valuable treasures in life are often hidden in plain sight, sometimes in the hands of a poor young woman who would feed a blind beggar without ever knowing he was a billionaire.